Wrapping up the summit today, it's been historic. It comes at a really important time. And of course, in the last 24 hours, BRICS leaders have been meeting amongst themselves. They've also been meeting all of the other leaders that have been invited here. As I said earlier, a flurry of activity on the ground. But let's unpack what this week has been like. My guest in studio now is Iman Rapetti, and she is a journalist, a broadcaster, and an author. Iman, thank you very much for joining me. Looking at this week, it's been so busy, but you have been interviewing quite a few people. What is the feeling on the ground, as BRICS, this partnership enters its second decade?
So I've been moderating. I moderated a panel on intra-BRICS trade, which I think is really the engine room of the combined economies. It's how these agreements are going to work. Once all of these memoranda of understanding have been signed, once the bilateral agreements start to have expression and definition, what is it going to mean for how these countries collaborate and work together? In other words, how do they puzzle fit? And here's what's interesting. In some of the panels, we talk about countries like China and India and their existing, infrastructure projects on the continent. Once the African Continental Free Trade Agreement comes into play, how are all of these things going to puzzle fit and stack together? And I think in practical terms, that's where we're going to see what it really means by way of collaborative and mutual development. One of the gospels of the trade minister in South Africa, Rob Davies, is the gospel of complementarity. Absolutely, it's about creating trade parity, making sure that the tariffs are in the mutual benefit of member countries. And really, it's about being able to sing from the same hymn sheet. I
think there is that realization coming through as well. So this has been around, BRICS has been around for 10 years. How do we move forward? He understands, and when I chatted to him as well, he said that, we understand that we're opening up these markets, but then we also need to clearly define the rules of engagement. And I think this is how they move into the next step of this partnership. Were you getting the sense that we are going to see more concrete measures and more concrete movements going forward?
Well, I mean, if you listen to the outgoing president now of the BRICS Business Council, Dr. Iqbal Survey, at the very beginning of his conference was talking about what in our minds would be really basic things that still need to be sorted out. Things like multi-visa entries, things like the regulation of standards, some of the guidelines, investment guidelines for member countries. What we want across the territories are investment-led trade. But if we haven't sorted out the basics, we haven't decided how the rules are going to be played, how are we practically going to be able to do that? So for me, as all of this comes to a head and we begin to say our goodbyes and red carpets are rolled back and put away in storage, is what does this mean practically going forward? And I think, Sumitra, one of the key things for us in South Africa, probably the same in China, India, Russia, and Brazil, is what are the dividends of meetings like this for small and medium enterprise? It's normally the big boys that get a seat at the table. It's normally the big arrangements and deals that are being signed. How does it filter into SMEs if that is really what the mutual engine rooms of all our economies are?
This was a really important topic, and I think the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry also put it down very nicely, saying that, you have strengthened relationships up there, but what about what's happening on the ground? And small business is so critical for not only South Africa, but for most of these economies, especially to create employment. How do we actually facilitate that kind of moving away from trade and bringing it down to business partnerships?
And investment, and real investment. I mean, we use these big words, right, like digitalization, fourth industrial revolution. But what does that mean for individual countries? And South Africa has been in the BRICS formation for around 7 years now. And we know that we've got a lot of work to do when it comes to retrofitting our economy to meet the challenges of a fourth industrial revolution. So our task really is going to be, how do we take what member countries have already been doing so well and replicate that in the South African space? How do we give it muscularity? For example, India's created its own response to Silicon Valley. You have Bangalore, which is an IT leader in the world, and they're working from a school, from an education perspective to make sure the pipeline is there. South Africa's got to do it better. In the field of agri-processing, Brazil is a champion in that regard. How do we do it? Manufacturing, there's China. So, in a sense, it's about getting really, really practical and being in a schoolroom, in a schoolroom of development and mutual collaboration.
And I think most of those agreements, there were quite a few projects. I think they have like 160 projects on the go under the BRICS Business Council to make sure and facilitate that these partnerships and the sharing of this knowledge and transfer of skills actually happens on the ground going forward.
Again, it's the gospel of complementarity. It's what's in it for us as a country, what's in it for us as worker-led economies, and ultimately, how does it impact our GDP? How does it impact whether we are, as a kind of southern bloc, able to respond to the countries of the north? Can we put up a really muscularized challenge to existing economies?
Iman, thank you very much for your time. Iman Rapetti, journalist, broadcaster, and author, joining me there.